Some memories cannot easily be forgotten, no matter how devastating and ugly they are. I often heard stories from several of Annette's school friends that there were allegedly male teachers interested in young girls, but maybe it was more a case of teenage girls having a crush on them. Was it nothing more than a fabrication? Sometimes one heard how certain teachers have been jailed for inappropriate behavior. Considering the news one hears these days in regard to student and teacher relationships of the unwanted kind, perhaps nothing was left for the imagination. But I was told that certain physical education teachers advise their female students against such relationships. Some girls were allegedly making use of the vulnerability of their male teachers. Unfortunately, there were students who blamed the teachers to hide their own shame. Some of her friends, sadly, had similar tendencies. Annette was very talented in telling make-believe tales, arguing them to be true. I still wonder what happened to the sweet child she used to be. She used to smile often, loved to dance, and was so wonderfully happy. What changed her into what she became? Where did we go wrong? Normally, parents with their opposing ideals could cause such an unacceptable change in a child's character. However, I am convinced that there was something else in play. Being imaginative, she was quite capable of making an elephant out of a small fly. Imagination is certainly highly desirable, especially when considering artistic endeavor. However, one needs to be cautious when defining imagination and psychosis. It needs to be noted that I am by no means judgmentally accusing anybody, but analytically observing the circumstances. When I was visited by her teachers and sometimes invited to the school, one of her teachers expressed concern about Annette not bringing any food to school for lunch. And when asked why it was so, she told the teacher that her father was having financial problems and could not afford to buy basic foods. It was embarrassing, and sadly, Annette told her form teacher that her dad would sometimes punish her for being naughty by not giving her any food. Was she perhaps confusing me with her mother? For this has never happened. The teachers were concerned, but I have always made sure they all had the best food available, had good clothing, and lived in a happy environment, so that they would develop mentally and physically, and in the process, hopefully become caring and kind people to themselves and others. Although her teachers did not believe the ugly stories they had been told, it really surprised me. One morning, after breakfast, and having prepared healthy sandwiches and fresh fruit in their lunch boxes, I decided to follow Annette from a safe distance so that she could not see me. After a period of walking towards the school, which normally took about 8 minutes, she dropped the contents of her lunchbox into a roadside rubbish container. I collected the items which were individually packed and went to the school. After meeting her form teacher and talking to her about the facts related to that incident, she told me she was personally going to talk to Annette and offer the food I took to school as if it was found by somebody else where she had accidentally dropped it. Alas, this trend went on for a while. I wondered if she was under the influence of her mother, thinking of me conjuring up bad spells with the sandwiches I prepared for her. I could not be sure, as she had very unusual characteristics, and her fabrications were almost compulsive, and was no longer a reliable individual. Whatever changed is still a puzzle for me. Has she ever changed? The teachers discovered that her father, as a sole parent, never neglected Annette as she claimed. I am sorry to say she never appreciated my parenthood, especially after being subjected to the wisdom of her school friends, who she obviously considered more intelligent and caring than her own parents. In fact, whenever I made suggestions about food or fashion, she always told me things like, "But my friend does not believe that. My friend said it could not be right. My friend would never wear something like that. My friend says she would not believe any man, because her mother—" She closed herself off completely as she matured. No one could tell her anything any more, for she had indeed become a big, all-knowing I am. Was this trend typical? What are we really teaching our children as a whole society? I might not always have been a perfect father to my children, and certainly not a perfect husband to their mother, but who is? Perhaps I was not an angel, but only human, with all my failings and hopefully some good aspects. However, I have never been as portrayed, and indeed all their poisoned darts have been continually directed at my person, as they still are. They were no longer seeing anything nice in me, blaming me for all their failings. I was rejected completely on advice given by the preachers of doomsday on their discovery of my faithlessness, as I did not follow man-made myths or cults. I was, as I still am, freed of all utopian beliefs. I choose to remain open-minded and accept everyone for who they are. I respected everybody without judging them, as I still do, but was treated as if I did not. I am forever grateful for all the gifts life has provided me with, for having life, for having great friends, a family, a wife, and wonderful children whom I never considered as my possessions, for they had their own lives to live. I worked and studied, earning some buying power, all for a wonderful life for my children and my family. I also had feelings, wishes and dreams like everybody else, for I am a human, but not evil. I was portrayed as being totally the opposite, yet I have always been a man with imagination and ambitions. I am a humanitarian, but I am not religious. Because of this, whenever I pointed at a Bible text to my wife, she always snapped at me, shouting, "Shut up, you godless, evil man! How dare you speak of God's word to me?" But I love all things. I always search for beautiful things in life. I was not evil, as I was portrayed. I am a philosopher, always trying to see the silver lining behind the brooding dark clouds, for I know the sun always shines behind them. I never desired to exaggerate things, but accepted them as they were. I still remain the same. I do not change in my resolve. I certainly did not come to earth to follow fanaticism of any kind. Rather, freely expressing myself, inventive and creative, colorful and happy, amicable and approachable, but never someone who would break all moral codes as I was painted. I preferred not to brag about myself then as now, but acknowledge my place in the world. I was not egotistical and did not consider my own interests above everything else, although deep inside I was still a child, but not immature, for I was forced to grow up very quickly, almost bypassing my childhood. I developed various interests over the years. I was interested in learning languages, for I wanted to be able to communicate with people. I was interested to get to know all about the wonderful human species, no matter what color, race, lingual background, or belief system. I have always seen myself as a friend to humanity, and want to remain like that. Certainly, I am not evil. I have always been interested in history, science, and mathematics, for I enjoy thinking. I have always been interested in the health of everybody around me. I am interested in a brilliant human mind, with the aim of discovering the processes of thought, and be helpful to people with their conflicts and confusions, assisting them to eliminate their fears and worries, encouraging them to live happier lives. If for some reason they could not do so due to their upbringing or beliefs, I would never cease assisting them. I would never force my beliefs onto others, and certainly never hypnotize them to do things contrary to their nature. I prefer to respect everyone's free will. I am not evil, as I was portrayed by the ill-informed and self-righteous. I tried all kinds of things, discovering that if we had the will, all of us could do almost anything. I always endeavored to encourage everybody never to give up, but always be on the move with patience, never dwelling on their past failings, for we are all human. Yet I was forever painted as evil by those who could not see anything good in others, only evil. I discovered that some people, supposedly my friends, were of a different persuasion, presented themselves as the only witnesses to a great God's unending love. On the surface, they were desirous for good things to happen to others, supposedly without judging one another, as was done by the so-called churches of God ages ago, condemning one another to eternal damnation. Yet they regarded themselves as being the only recipients of eternal life. I am convinced that their philosophy was invented by some self-made ministers to convince them to accept and be led. Personally, I prefer complete freedom in thought, imagination, and inventiveness. Yet despite my own failings and successes, I resolved to do better next time. Alas, I discovered that there were no next times with certain aspects of our lives. Therefore, instead of thinking in terms of it could have been, and carrying the load of our bitter memories for the rest of our lives, I aim to look at different horizons courageously. It is certainly better to start something new, never believing and accepting that it might be too late. This lowest act of my portrayal by people of dogma was for the purpose of punishing me, or perhaps even teaching me a lesson about their God being just. It was also a definite expression in considering me as worthless and useless garbage, amongst many other things, just the same as Magda regarded my memorabilia. In reality, it was geared to destroy what was beautiful, my family, my lifelong companion, who was my friend, and my children's lives, by effectively twisting their minds against me, so that they would continue with their newfound traditions and trends to hate me wholeheartedly for the rest of their lives. Instead, I refused to bend like they wanted me to, holding fast to my democratic right to be me, without harm to anyone, for we, as humans, are free agents, freely roaming the cosmos, and therefore our lives must be like a freedom song. Those so-called friends were people who would delight in kicking a falling man, and never offer a helping hand. They were those who forever condemned everybody in the world, no matter where their devotion had led them. Even people and organizations performing charitable deeds for many others were viewed in the same light. That was not my world. I was mistaken by believing in those who despised and rejected me, truly destroying my family in the name of their God. Sadly, they kept claiming to be my righteous friends. They proved themselves to support the real criminals in case they repented their evil deeds, accepting them as if nothing had happened, and yet shunning those whom they disfellowshipped for their greatest sin of questioning the Spirit. They, the Jehovah's Witnesses, consider a murderer or pedophile and a person questioning the Spirit, as they interpret in their own biased ways of thinking, as equal in sinning. Where is the logic in this? And where the righteousness? However, when considering Annette's claims that her father had been neglecting her, whereas her school principal and teachers knew that it was not so, I must include that I never said anything about it to her, and behaved as if nothing had happened. Despite her attitude towards me and her dislike of the food I prepared, I kept following her, picking up the lunch items I had deliberately placed in special packaging from where she was dumping them every morning, and taking them to the school without her knowledge. It was becoming an interesting game as I kept collecting those packages and fresh fruit. One morning, however, an elderly woman passing by asked me if I was so desperate for food that I had to dig into the roadside bins. It was embarrassing, and I felt the need to tell her the reason. Later I discovered that Annette's teachers had also noticed that she was losing weight fast, telling everyone she was undernourished and not looked after. Whenever I heard others speak like that, I felt more depressed, for I never neglected her, and her health was vitally important to me. I was not sure about her sister Birgit. She was a very quiet one when home, but kept being very active when at school. However, she was not as thin as her sister. It appeared as if she had a better understanding of me than Annette and her mother. I was seeing my son very rarely while his mother was trying to completely alienate and distance him from me. Was that not evil? I know for a fact that because all Jehovah's Witnesses shunned me, Magda, Jehovah's faithful servant, could not do any less. That was the reason she always avoided talking to me, answering my questions in regard to the children with silence. Could she at all understand that she was being led to believe in a fantasized idea created by those who wanted to own her? On the other hand, Birgit was telling me over and over that their mother often told them never to mention the name of that evil man, encouraging them to think of him as if he was dead and buried. Whenever Birgit told her mother, "But I still love my dad," she would answer her with, "You are all like him. Then just go and stay with him. You will see what happens." One morning I collected Annette's lunch from the nearby bin, as usual, and went to the school to meet her form teacher and principal during a lunch break for a chat. They were going to invite Annette to the principal's office. When she saw me, I could see how outraged, bewildered, and anger-filled she was. I told her I found her lunch where she had lost it. As she grabbed her lunch, the principal told her that she could at least thank her father. And as she walked towards the door, one could hear her very softly saying, "Thanks." This scenario reminded me how her mother treated me when we were living in Germany. In the late afternoon, when Annette came home, as one might have expected, throwing her school bag into one corner and kicking her runners on the other, she went to her room and kept silent for a while. Not hearing a sound for some time, I went to ask her what she would like to eat. She again sulked and shouted, calling me a fucking bastard, and added, "You have embarrassed me yet again. I don't even wanna go back to that fucking school." I took her bag and shoes to her bedroom and said nothing. She continued to name me with her personalized words for a long time. I could not understand her any more, and was really starting to worry about having her sole custody. On one side, I was worrying about my own health problems, my current employment situation due to a number of political issues, and on the other, what my wonderful daughters were encouraged to do to break away from me. I believe that when, as an infant, her German grandparents encouraged her to be utterly fearful of me, snatching her from my arms every time I was holding her, or changing her nappies, had a detrimental effect on her psyche. Later, as she matured as a young child, the Jehovah's Witnesses, through auspices of her mother, made sure that she turned against all evil in the world by turning against her father, who they had disfellowshipped due to his disobedience to the Spirit. Sometimes directly, and at times discreetly, they forced Magda, their faithful sister and servant, to break away from me, the unbeliever. However, they still insist that they did not. They knew how to manipulate and alter Magda's mind well, due to their knowledge of her extreme naivety. My children were constantly bombarded with subtle encouragements to hate their father, whether it was obvious to their mother or not. All their spiritual work, which has lasted until now, was beginning to pay dividends during Annette's teenage years. Now she was also subject to peer pressure from her close friends, even several teenage boys, which was having a very strong effect on her personality. She used to regularly ask me if I would let her invite her boyfriends to our home, where they could all sleep together in her room. That was frighteningly untenable. I was aware of her desire to get to know her own self and discover about the opposite gender, but her sexuality seemed to overpower her entire thoughts. She obviously could not talk to her mother in regard to her womanhood concerns, as it was not available. Magda was certainly not desirous to talk about the important questions from a growing young girl. Annette could not comfortably talk to me of her concerns in regard to the inner feelings she was becoming aware of when in the presence of boys. The information I could provide her with could only be dependent on my indirect knowledge of human development, as I never experienced how a woman would feel. But Magda insisted that the girls should ask their father about their innermost emotions. "Go and ask your dad. He has your custody." By observing of other teenage girls, I believe that the girls would feel more comfortable talking about their bodies with their mother. On the other hand, I could not accommodate any of her friends at my place due to principles I respected, whether she liked it or not. I did not feel comfortable with the idea of having teenage boys sleeping with her under my roof. She took my wishes and principles as hindrance for her being happy and having fun. She often called me a bloody bastard, and told me that I never wanted her to be happy. I would never lower myself by responding to her other than keeping quiet. I found that silence was the best reaction I could provide her with. Obviously, she was taking some of her school friends' wisdom very seriously about how she should live without any parental input, freely, wherever she could be housed, and be looked after when she needed welfare and health care. No doubt a number of boys promised her the world, and she only heeded the advice of her peers on how to be happy. After some while, perhaps also being advised by her friends that she should stay with her father a little longer for financial reasons and comfort, she appeared to calm down a little. One day she shocked me by asking if she had a baby, would I look after it? Alas, I found it very hard to wipe off these uniquely shocking memories. On one side, she behaved as if she could drown me in a drop of water in her uncontrolled anger, and on the other, asked me to look after her baby if she had one. What a confusion it was! I mentioned that perhaps her mother would like to care for her baby if she had one, and she should ask her. What she asked me explained a lot more about her lifestyle, making me feel helpless. She admired people living free with anybody they chose and changing their partners often, and spoke about it very candidly as if needing to teach me. I often wondered what she was on. Magda's attitude could be interpreted as if I, the unbeliever, chose that lifestyle normally as many witnesses and their loving sister would expect of people like me. Several witnesses who did not know me and met me later spoke to me along those lines without realizing I was no longer accepted by their other brothers and sisters. Unfortunately, teenage pregnancies were becoming an epidemic. When I was finally able to communicate with their mother, at least in this instance, she was in agreement with me for once, although avoided eye contact, talking into the air. However, I believe that she had been advised to try to communicate with me, in case I might be saved from the clutches of the devil. When some time ago I made suggestion that maybe we could try getting back together for a short while, but if it did not work, we could go our separate ways again, without any heartbreak or blame. As mentioned, she had to consult with her faithful brothers first, and if they agreed, she was going to let me know. The family court accepted our proposal for a trial period, and Magda moved into my Elwood address, but immediately began complaining about how small the unit was, without giving me a chance to tell her what I was planning. She said she was not interested in materialism, and that was her final word. A week later, she was yet again interrogating me about this and the other girl. She had changed significantly, for she was not a very happy woman, presenting a persona of being enslaved to a lifestyle forced upon her by the cult. Even physically she looked different. For instance, she plucked her eyebrows into thin lines as it was in the 1940s, but it did not suit her. In reality, it made her look like a witch. If I had a magic wand, I would probably change her looks immediately. However, it was her choice, and I was not going to make any comment about it. The girl I once loved had beautiful eyebrows, but this face I was gazing upon declared that she was no longer the girl I used to know. A short time later, she was complaining that she did not feel free to worship God by going house to house, preaching, or visiting kingdom halls with the children, as they never wanted to go to those places any more. They appeared to experience satiety. If we were to live as a family again, I decided to surprise her with our own home, which was going to be large enough and hopefully to her liking. Our young son and daughters would have their own bedrooms, and she would have a separate room if she preferred. The court removed the original decision for our access period, and we were to have joint custody of our children as before. But Annette was of an age where she had the right to choose which parent she wanted to stay with or live elsewhere. Hopefully, she would have the wisdom to choose the right path. However, Magda's absolute intention was exactly as the Jehovah's Witnesses wished her to do, to raise her children as she was dictated, bypassing the young one's desires and ignoring me completely. I have seen people from different backgrounds, race, and religious identities, and they were happy as family units despite all their differences. But I had the distinct feeling that it would be very difficult for us, as we had lived apart for such a long time. Furthermore, she would never change her resolve, and I could not be persuaded to accept an elusive God who is ever ready to destroy the world. I could perhaps keep enduring and tolerating, but my heart was no longer willing to live the rest of our lives in restrictions inflicted upon us by a man-made religious belief system, although I never opposed anybody. I made mention of my health-related concerns, and that several biopsies indicated I might develop a form of cancer over the years, and that I had to keep a watchful eye for any developments. Interestingly, Magda did not pay any heed to what I had said, as if I was telling lies. She was obviously adamant to believe nothing I explained. I was expected to be an unfaithful, untruthful person, like the rest of the world. Deep down, I did not want to continue with this arrangement. If we could at all live together, how long would it last without any hurt? It was anybody's guess. Soon after, Magda moved to an address close by, complaining that my place was too small. Although we both seemingly agreed that we would share the welfare and health expenses of the children, access to them would remain open-ended. In other words, if the children wanted to stay with either parent, they were free to do so. The girls were not happy about me letting their mother stay with us, and chose to live with me perhaps because they could celebrate birthdays and Christmas more freely. I had the very distinct feeling that both our daughters felt betrayed by their father for allowing the restrictive parent to move in, even for that very short period of time. Considering the circumstances, I personally thought it to be a healthier arrangement, yet I was unsure about Magda's new trend for desiring to stay at our place for that very short time. I felt she had a distinct plan and ulterior motive. However, my observations in relation to Annette's behavior did not look promising. Even then, Magda hardly ever allowed Claude to come near me. The girls did not like being lectured forever about everything they wanted to do, and were forced to listen to her forever complaints about their father being an untrustworthy person for not recognizing the truth. Apparently she was still preaching to the children for hours why it was better for them to stay with her, because she was doing the right thing as a parent, for she adhered to the truth of witnesses. She was most certainly using psychological methods to convince them that they would be better off if they separated from their father permanently, and the girls began behaving very coldly, treating me as if I was doing everything wrong and telling untruths all the time. It became more and more obvious as time went by that we were experiencing communication breakdown. Annette named me anew an unreliable and unbelievable man. Before we began that trial period, she declared that she could not trust me if I allowed her mother to stay with us and yet, strangely, she was unbelievably friendly towards her.